Good afternoon. My name is Ala McCoy. I am Director of Startup Support at the University of Maryland UM Ventures. And I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who joined us today for the live session and also to those who are watching us on YouTube. Thank you for joining today's installment in Startup Fundamentals Workshop Series. And this workshop series is offered by UM Ventures in collaboration with MTech at the Clark School of Engineering and Neuman Center for Entrepreneurship at the Smith School of Business. Everyone in the live session, please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And Laura will answer your questions at the end of the session. And to those watching us on YouTube, please let me know if you'd like to get in touch with Laura for additional questions, and I can provide that information on how to do that. So today, I asked Laura Neuman, our entrepreneur in residence, to share her amazing story about why she chose entrepreneurship out of other available paths. And she agreed to share her very personal story and the story of her struggles and how she dealt with them with us today. I won't say much about Laura and her background because she will do that in the entire session. I don't want to spoil it. But again, please submit your questions via the Q&A and we'll get to them. And thank you so much, Laura, for joining us today and sharing your absolutely amazing story. The mic is yours. I'll stop my video and mute my mic, but I am here.
Terrific. Well, thank you for having me today. It's a real honor to be here. And thank you for everyone who's joining us. I love talking about entrepreneurship, and we often talk about it in a way that is around, how do you, start a company as an entrepreneur? How do you think about, hiring or putting together the organization? I'm going to take a much more personal approach today. It's something that I love to talk about because I'm often asked, how did you become an entrepreneur? And in fact, there was a point in my career where I was out at Stanford and I was with some of the most impressive people from all over the world. And as they watched my entrepreneurship journey, they asked me, in fact, some just told me that they wanted to be entrepreneurs, but many asked how to do it. And I found that so interesting because I wanted what they had, which was, an opportunity in a large, stable company. For me, entrepreneurship was really about creating opportunity for myself. And that's kind of the foundation. And that's what I want to talk about today. So, I'm going to start at the beginning. And hang on, let me see if I can get my slide. There we go. This is my very first home. I really want to go back to the very beginning because I think it sets the foundation for who we are in the world. And for me, entrepreneurship is a journey about creating opportunity. This was my first home. This is the home I was brought home to when I left the hospital. And if you'll notice on the front door, that's not a single house. That was two homes. So I was in a growing family of, two parents unprepared for the responsibilities that came with having 5 children. The truth is that both of my parents really struggled. And I often, when I give presentations about my background, I say to people, what do you see when you look at me? Because we so often have an impression of people, and that is based on our own personal experience. And the truth is every one of us has a journey and every one of us has a story. And my story started here. And the reason it's so important is because it's not a place that you look to and think about as opportunity, because there wasn't any. In fact, this is Section 8 housing in Baltimore City. But it is where I started. And the truth is that I wouldn't be who I am had I not gone through the experiences and struggles along the way. But those struggles started with my parents. They didn't start with me. It was long before I was born. Both of my parents were very young when they got married. They were both high school dropouts. And in fact, they both were arrested multiple times. They struggled. I grew up wanting to live a very different life. My goal was to escape that home and move into a future of opportunity. I ended up, in many ways, challenging what they had done, but in other ways, just falling into the same unfortunate patterns that they fell into. But the reason I share this picture is because this is me in kindergarten. Now, when you look at this young girl, you see happiness, you see opportunity, you see potential. What I think is so striking about this is that the truth is that I was living in a house like you saw. By then we had moved to another Baltimore City row house. and I was now 5 in this picture. But even though we were still in Baltimore City and we were still struggling, there's still hope. You can see in my eyes that I, still have this spark of possibility. And I think that's so important because we all start with that. No matter what our circumstances are, there's a potential future in us because every one of us is full of potential. So, as I think about and I think back on this, and by the way, I've done a lot of research about my history and how I got to the place that I am today. I just think every time we look at a child, we should see potential and possibility and hope. That continued for me into high school. So I was growing up in a family where, it was stressful. My parents were very abusive. They didn't know how to parent. They really struggled. We were constantly trying to make ends meet. And in fact, we couldn't without some help from relatives. But despite that, I continued to be hopeful. And you can see that in the smile on my face. I think that is the essence of what an entrepreneur is. It's believing in possibility. Like there's always something else out there that we can strive for or that we can achieve. Now, this is my 1 year I spent in this particular private school. It was a Catholic school, actually. I grew up in Baltimore City public schools. And it was after this year that I was forced to drop out. So I followed in my parents' footsteps and dropped out of high school in the 11th grade. I felt fortunate that I got to spend a year in this school, but, and I really did believe that I would do it differently than they had done it in my family. But no one in my family went to college. It wasn't something that we did, and it wasn't a path to opportunity that was ever discussed. I mean, it just wasn't part of our discussion. My parents weren't really engaged in school and planning for a future. But before that happened, I still had this spark in my eye, which you can see here. So I was 17 here, and that was the end of my school career. So what do you do when you don't have an education and you don't feel like there's a path to a possibility or opportunity? You become a waitress, which is what I did. And to be honest with you, I just love that work, and I still do. There's something about going to work every day and working hard that leads to a real sense of satisfaction. But something else happened around this time that took me off of my path and put me in a really frightening direction. I had moved out of my parents' house with this goal and this dream of, possibility in college and building a career for myself and doing it differently than they did. And so I decided when I was 18, as soon as I turned 18, I've already now dropped out of high school, just like my parents did. And instead of living at home, I thought I would rather live in my car. And so I moved into my car and I lived out of that car for 6 months while I saved enough money as a waitress to put a down payment on an apartment. And this is where my story gets really personal. And I hope that everyone listening today is comfortable with me sharing the details. But I now am out in the world entirely on my own, looking very young, as you can see, trying to figure out how to create a path without any mentorship or guidance. And certainly I didn't feel like my family was a place that I could go for support. So I've moved out of my car, which was a 1975 Pontiac Ventura. I should have given you a picture of that. And I saved the money for a down payment on an apartment. Now, we all today talk about, living in your first house and buying your first house, and home ownership is the path to opportunity and wealth. But the truth is that when you don't have that available to you, you have to work with what you can afford. And so I rented a lot of rooms in other people's houses. But I wanted to, my very first apartment that I wanted to, sort of use as my launching pad to go to community college, I moved into when I was 18. And 2 months after moving in, I was home alone. I had a roommate. We both worked in the same restaurant. And my roommate came home. He was actually out with his girlfriend. I came home and I was by myself, fell asleep. And before he returned home, 2 people broke into my apartment and I was raped at gunpoint. So when I woke up, I was asleep. And when I woke up, there was a pillow covering my face and there was a gun pressed against my head. And the truth is that you can't escape that. There's no way to fight back. There's nowhere to go from there. And, I know many of us on this call today have encountered incredible challenges that feel almost insurmountable. But the truth is that, you always have a choice in those situations. You can either curl up in a ball or you can go forward. And I say that all the time because they really are your only 2 choices. And sometimes you curl up in a ball and then you go forward. For me, I constantly believed that there was something else that was in front of me and that I had to strive for that. And so that's what I did. I called the police that night. They came to my apartment. My roommate came home not long after it happened. I actually thought that the perpetrators were returning and it was my roommate coming home. And we called the police, and the police came, and I was very young. They saw that I was young. They saw that I wasn't living at home, and they made a judgment call about me. Their bias led them to a conclusion that I was lying about being raped. So not only did they tell me that they didn't believe me, they also told my family that they didn't believe me. And so now I've been through this incredibly tragic, traumatic event, and I'm by myself out in the world trying to figure out what to do with this. But I can't even rely on the public safety net. And so I was very much alone. And at that point, it was really about getting through hours at a time and then days at a time. But I just kept going because I believed that there was still a possibility of something on the other side of it. And when I was waiting tables in this restaurant, I happened to answer a help wanted ad, or I was like, I need a career. So I wanted to work in a company, but I didn't really know what a company was. I just knew I didn't want to be a waitress and a bartender, even though I enjoyed that work. So I started looking for a job, and I did what we do when we're looking for a job. I went to the help wanteds, and I saw an advertisement for a customer service rep. And it was at a company I'd never heard of because I didn't even know what companies were really, other than as a consumer. I didn't know that business was a career path. So I responded to this ad for a customer service rep, and it happened to be with a company called T. Rowe Price. T. Rowe Price is one of the largest employers in the state of Maryland. And I called them and said, hey, can I come in and interview for this job? And they said, well, we don't really hire people who don't have a college degree, because I had to admit that I was a high school dropout and that I hadn't gone to college. And I asked them, I said, will you at least take a chance on me and hire me anyway? And I promise you that I'll go back to college and I will finish. And for everyone on the call, I absolutely encourage you to stay in school and finish, because it is a much easier path to opportunity. In my case, I really couldn't afford it. I applied for Pell Grants, I applied for student loans, but the cost of college was far beyond what was covered by any financial support. So I ended up not being able to go, but T. Rowe Price, and they hired me as a customer service rep, and that was my start in business. So I took this job for $7 an hour, part-time. There were no benefits. In fact, they said to me, you don't qualify for benefits. And I said, that's okay, because I don't know what benefits are anyway. I was just grateful for the job. And I continued to wait tables in the evening and on the weekends while I was working during the day as a customer service rep. That gave me access to a whole new world. And so for many of us, our world is the result of everything that we've been exposed to and that we've seen around us. So we don't know that there's another world out there until we have an opportunity to see it. Well, there are a couple places that I saw a world beyond the one that I was raised in. One was the library. I read about other people and other lives, and I was exposed to something beyond my immediate neighborhood, which was very limited. The second was that I was raised a Catholic, and so I went to First Communion as an 8-year-old. And for me, that created a set of rules. So whether you're for religion or against it, or you're indifferent to it, for me, that gave me a guidebook. And so that became my operating principles out in the world. And the third was working in a company and being hired by T. Rowe Price. And I have to tell you that I didn't know this world existed. I mean, they only hired college degrees. I didn't know that, everybody had a college degree who started in business. But I also realized that, while that was their experience, all of these people that I was in a training group with and who became my friends didn't know my background. They didn't know where I started unless I shared that with them. And so I became part of this group because I wanted the same path that they were interested in. It was very appealing to me, and I wanted a career in business. And so I became part of a group that I'd never been exposed to before, and I learned how to be successful in that environment. I also loved it. I realized I wanted a career in business. So for me, this was like, it was the ideal place to be. And in fact, I had this idea that I was going to then go and apply to other companies or move up within T. Rowe Price. And I quickly had a wake-up call that that's not really possible in large companies without checking the right boxes. And one of those boxes, of course, is finishing college. So I applied to all the big companies everyone wanted to work for. IBM was a big one, Microsoft, Apple, and I got turned down over and over again. I also applied to other companies in the same space as T. Rowe Price. I applied to Legg Mason, Alex Brown. And in every case, because I didn't check the right boxes, and this is so important when you're thinking about an entrepreneurial path, I didn't check the right boxes for them. And so I was never hired for an opportunity beyond basic administrative work. And so, I knew all this time, I'm like, I have so much to offer. I was willing to work hard. I was always a hard worker. I was willing to take on any project. But they didn't see in me the potential that I saw in myself. And so throughout my 20s, I just worked in companies where I could get a better job or a better salary. And I quickly hit a ceiling. I was always hired for account management or sales, but never really into a management role. And so, that felt very limiting. And I didn't know where to go from there. But what I did know is that I still needed to keep a roof over my head and I needed to take care of myself. So I took a job. It wasn't really the job that I wanted, but it was a job that paid the bills and it made it possible for me to buy my first house. It was with a direct marketing company, which isn't the place that I wanted to be, but it was the place where I could get hired. And so I took that job and worked really hard there, and that provided a path to home ownership. Now that house might not look like your ideal first house, but for me, it was heaven on earth, because the truth is it's just really an extraordinary experience to have something that not only have you bought yourself, but it was my home. And it's the first home that I ever, first of all, I ever owned, but my parents never owned their home either. So I was the first person in my family to buy a home on my own. My brother got married and he and his wife eventually bought their home together. But I felt a tremendous sense of accomplishment because it gave me a sense of place. And because I had learned a lot about business, it also made it possible for me to spend more money owning a home than I was paying in rent, because I got a roommate and the net cost on it was less expensive than being a renter. So I felt very proud of that accomplishment, but it also brought a tremendous amount of responsibility, because now that I had a mortgage, which I actually didn't know what that was when I first bought the house, I had this huge responsibility to follow through and make sure it got paid. I really thought that at that point I was going to move into this great career in technology. And so, technology was becoming a very big thing at that point. And I thought, if it's a growing industry, they'll be able to overlook not having some of the traditional credentials. That turned out to be harder than I thought. While I was working at the direct marketing firm, I went in every day dressed as if I was working at a bank, even though I was working in a basement, and my desk actually was in a hallway. And that turned out to be a really smart decision. Showing up is such an important step in the process. In fact, showing up is part of every step in the process. I went into work one day and a client came in, a potential client. And because I was there to represent my company, I took it very seriously and I gave it everything I had, and I was very professional. I didn't enjoy the work, but I really felt strongly that I had to do the best job I could for the company that had hired me. So this potential client, it turned out, was recruiting for the MBA program at Loyola University. They came in for a direct marketing campaign, and I happened to meet with the recruiter for the program. And after our meeting, I think she was impressed with how I handled myself, and she called and suggested that I apply to their program. Now, as you can imagine, that was like the greatest day of my life, right? Because I was like, wow, like this person sees potential in me, which is what I wanted all along. But I also knew that I wasn't qualified. So I was conflicted between feeling really excited about this recognition, but also feeling uncomfortable and not sure how to really handle a call like that. So I didn't respond. I didn't call her back. In fact, I didn't show up. And then she called me again. And so I realized the second time she called, I had a choice. I could either show up or I could just let this opportunity pass me by. And I decided to show up, and I went in and met with the assistant dean of the program. I know that was a bold move, but I went and sat down in his office, and I know they were thinking, why is this person coming in? Why doesn't she just apply to the program? It was a master's in business program. And I sat down in his office, and I remember just being really nervous. Like, I was very quiet, and he's looking at me like, why are you here? Like, just fill out the application. But the reason I was there is because I wanted him to take a chance on me. And I said, when you're in these awkward conversations that, by the way, I requested, it's up to me to make that conversation move forward. And so I said, look, this is what I walked him through. I said, this is where I started. I explained how I started in life, how I got off track. And I said, this is where I am now. And I explained I was a really hard worker. And I asked him if he would be willing to take a chance on me and let me into the MBA program. Now, that decision was not his alone. But what he said was, I want to share one little thing about that. So in that conversation, I walked him through this story of my life and how I got to the point of sitting in front of him, asking him to take a chance on me. And there's this temptation when you're doing that to just keep talking, because you want to convince the person. So you just keep talking. And the truth is that you have to know when to stop talking. So what I did was I sat there silently until he responded, because then if the other person starts talking, then they can buy into what you're suggesting. And so I just, at that point, sat there and listened. And finally, he said, look, this is what, it's not impossible. First, he said, it's not impossible. He said, but these are the things you would have to do. You have to take the GMAT. And I was like, well, I didn't know what a GMAT was, but of course I didn't tell him that. And you need to get great recommendations. And so I was like, okay, I'll do that. And he said, well, you can do all of those things and we might still say no. And so I had to accept that I could do all the work that he was telling me I had to do in order to be considered, and I still might not get that opportunity. They could still say no. And that happens over and over and over in life. You can show up and you can do the work, but that's not a guarantee of an outcome. But I was willing to take that chance. So I realized that the GMAT was 2 weeks away. I signed up for the prep class, thinking that would prepare me to take this test that I hadn't before then even heard of. And I'd never honestly taken a standardized test because I dropped out after the 11th grade. So I signed up for the test, or for the prep class, I mean, and I'm like, okay, this will prepare me. And I signed up for the GMAT. I went into the class. It was, by the way, the last chance I could take the GMAT before hitting the deadline for the application. So I had to hit this date that was 2 weeks out. So I sat down in the prep class with all of my pencils sharpened, ready to go. And I quickly realized I wasn't prepared. I needed the pre-prep class. So I hadn't had enough schooling to prepare me for this challenge. And so I realized that that wasn't going to do it. And in fact, there were no refunds. So I had to go out and hire a tutor, and I did through Princeton Review. And I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the GMAT. You've got to be able to go deep, no matter how hard it is, no matter how insurmountable it seems, you have to be able to go deeper. Let go of what's not working and move in a positive direction. I had then lost $450 and critical time toward this first step in the goal. And I had to let it go and move forward. So I signed up for the tutor, I took the GMAT, and I hit the number they needed me to hit to pass in order to be accepted. They had a certain number on the score that I had to hit, and I hit that number. I slightly exceeded that number. Next up was recommendations. They needed to see great recommendations. They want to know that other people think that I'm worth investing in. And so I went to everyone I knew, every employer, colleague, and friend, and was like, can you write me a letter of recommendation? And I did. I submitted all of them, and they were your standard recommendations, you know, your boss, your colleague. And I took them back to them feeling pretty good that I had, you know, met this requirement. And they came back and said, do you have anyone else? And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So at this point, I had moved into a position in tech, and I was working for a company called DigX. And DigX was a Maryland-based company that was early in the technology space. And when I got this job, again, of course, it was in sales and account management because they were the jobs that I could get. But while I was there was this big event that was happening in Maryland, and it was with a local nonprofit called Living Classrooms. So Living Classrooms was like part of this big charitable event, and they needed an internet connection. So I went to my new employer in this tech company and said, hey, can we donate an internet connection for this charitable event? Now, they did it because they really believe in giving back to the community. And I did it because I wanted to be helpful. And I knew that, you know, this would make this event a success. I never thought that it would in any way impact me or my career. But it turned out that when I needed more recommendations for Loyola, the person I went to was the person I worked with on that project. It was a guy named Parker Rockefeller. And I went to Parker and said, hey, Parker, you know, would you consider writing me a letter of recommendation for this program? And what I want you to know about that is that I did something to help someone because it was the right thing to do, not knowing that it was ever going to come back and help me. But the truth is, it changed my life, because when Parker was willing to write that letter of recommendation for me, it was not just people who were friends and family. It was someone else who was a colleague who I worked with. And his recommendation really changed the conversation at Loyola. In fact, it made me a more credible candidate. So it's important to have people around you who are willing to, say that you're worth the investment as well. And I know there's a part of me and maybe a part of you that's kind of like, well, maybe just if I work hard, that should be enough. But the truth is that people are always looking for data points as they think about investing in you. They want to know that you're a good investment. Well, I was letting Loyola know that I was a good contributor in the community. And in fact, even though I did that to be helpful, it ended up being a great recommendation. So I thought I was done at that point. And I was feeling really good that I had nailed this. And Loyola came back and said, do you have anyone else? So I was like, at that point, I was like, oh my gosh, let me think about it. So I realized as I thought about it that 10 years earlier, and again, this is really about building that foundation of credibility. 10 years earlier at T. Rowe Price, I had come in on a day when no one else made it into the office. Now, there was a massive snowstorm. It was really hard to get in, but it was part of my do everything you can do anything you have to do to prove yourself approach. And I was in the office and very few people made it in that day. And so the CEO of T. Rowe Price sent me a letter, which was relatively short, saying, thank you for making it in and being so helpful to the company. So because people who are successful talk to each other and know each other, I went back to my friend Parker and said, hey, Parker, is there any chance that you know George Collins? I wanted to see if he would consider writing me a letter of recommendation. And I showed him this letter I had kept that George Collins had written to me 10 years earlier. And he took it to George Collins, and George Collins wrote me a letter of recommendation as well. And so the message there really is that every time you're doing something, not only to be helpful, but to be a contributor, you are basically laying the foundation for, someone who is not only worth investment, but someone that other people want to work with. And so I took this back to Loyola, and a couple of weeks before the program started, I was accepted. And so that's how I got a master's degree in business without finishing high school or college. And that fundamentally shifted my opportunities. Once I was a candidate for an MBA, it didn't matter what my previous experience was. What mattered is that I was working hard and that I had something to contribute, and that it was something that people could connect with in a very tangible way. So I started applying for different jobs. I went back to Microsoft and IBM and all the big companies that I wanted to work with before, and they still said no, because I was still a non-traditional candidate. But I applied to smaller companies, more entrepreneurial companies, where I knew that they needed hard workers, but they might not be able to attract the same kinds of talent that the larger companies were used to. And I knew that I could prove myself if I just had a chance. And so I ended up at an internet company in DC, and that company certainly had its challenges, but they also had the patent for a very unique new product. Well, for me, that's just nothing but opportunity. If you're telling me what the goal is, I'm going to go for that goal. And so I signed up to, turn this product into an industry. And the person who interviewed me was like, what do you think is the best target market for this product? It was a way of aggregating internet traffic in a building. And I answered it correctly. He already knew the answer, of course. It was hotels and also apartment buildings. So he hired me to go out and find a way to sell this product. Now, the entrepreneurial mindset is about how do you find opportunity where it's not obvious. And so I quickly realized that, this was an idea that was going to be attractive to the hotel industry. So I got us on the agenda as a speaker at a hospitality conference almost immediately, because they're always looking for speakers. And we were able to help them, and they helped us. Ended up going to this conference and quickly got Microsoft to endorse our technology. And the company, a couple years later, was going to do an IPO. Now, at this point, I have to tell you, because it's so important, that I thought literally I was the smartest person in the room. I was being paid a lot of money. They gave me a great salary. They gave me a great title. I thought I had made it. I was the first person in my family to buy a new car. I'm in my house. I was actually in my second house by then. And I thought I had it all figured out. In fact, I was feeling really quite proud of myself. This company went ahead and did an IPO. And what I realized is that, in fact, I wasn't nearly as smart as I thought I was, because what I didn't have was equity. So when that company filed an IPO on their S1, which is the document you file to do an IPO, and the IPO is really where the real opportunity is in technology companies, and ownership, equity ownership, which I didn't fully understand, is where the upside is. And so they filed their S1. I was one of only 2 employees in the entire company to even have an employment contract, because every deal on that S1 was closed by me or someone I hired. And that's real value. That's tangible value. In fact, I closed a hotel chain to install our technology in every one of their hotels. That was a big deal because it enabled that company to do that IPO. And what I realized is that where I didn't quite understand, and I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, is that I didn't have equity. And in fact, I had been cut out of equity right before the IPO. They renegotiated my contract. In fact, they did it twice while I was there to, again, take shares off the table. Well, real wealth, if you want to build real wealth, generational wealth, you have to have ownership. We always talk about home ownership, and I got that. I did that, even though it was very scary. But this is about ownership in what you build. It's about having upside. If you've invested and you've taken the risk, you want to have upside in that. And I was cut out of that. And that was a real lesson for me, that maybe we don't always know what we think we know, and there's always more to be learned. But I took that lesson and I decided I was going to do the most with it. And in my next company, I wanted ownership. It didn't matter to me as much what the company was, even though I wanted it to be in technology, but I knew I wanted ownership. And so I ended up getting offered this great job, again, with a great salary, because now I have a bit of a track record. And I turned it down to go run a company that was insolvent. In fact, the company couldn't even pay for their patent filings, but it was started by a couple of really brilliant guys out of NSA. They had gone out and tried to raise money, and they wanted to build a successful company, but they didn't have the business experience. Even though their idea was great and they had the patent on it, you need money to build a company, and they weren't prepared for that part of the journey. And they hired me to come in as the CEO. Now that sounds great, right? You want to be the CEO. That sounds terrific. Well, I'm here to tell you that there's the CEO, and then there are the folks who come up with a great idea. Occasionally they are the same person, but often they are not. And in this case, we had some really brilliant technical scientists who started the company, but they needed some business experience. And so the question became, can I take that kind of risk? And in fact, I did. I ended up signing up as a CEO, but they didn't have any money to pay me. So I was not going to get paid until I raised the money to get paid. In fact, I cashed in all my savings. I cashed in my 401k. I paid my mortgage and bought my own computer for working in this company on a credit card. I took the risk. In other words, I jumped off the cliff. Now, we love those stories, right? We love those entrepreneurial stories. Took the risk, got the big payoff. Well, there's no guarantee. Again, you can do all the work and have no guarantee of the outcome. There is seldom, a clear path to the outcome. But I was willing to take that risk, and I'll tell you why. Because I was willing to bet on myself. I was going to prove to everyone out there that they should have taken a chance on me. And in fact, I could do this work, and I could do it well, and I would be successful. So I took the risk. I jumped off the cliff. I signed up as the CEO. I don't remember the exact amount, but I think I raised close to 17 million in venture capital and turned the company around. And in fact, the company was voted Venture Capital Deal of the Year. And ultimately, I didn't sell it, but it was later sold for $230 million. Now, that's a big deal. That's a life-changing event. But again, there was no clear path to that opportunity. It was about creating that path. And that's what entrepreneurs do. We look for value. We figure out how to take this idea, which we hope is unique and patentable. But even if it isn't, we start with this idea. And then we figure out, how do we take that idea that solves a big problem out in the world and turn it into a product? How do we productize what was originally an idea? And that's what we did. We turned it into a product, and it's still a product that's being used today. So that journey is the part that is so difficult for so many entrepreneurs. And in fact, it was difficult for the founders of this company. You have to get it from idea or concept into product, and then get that product out into the market. And that's the foundation for building your company. And it was an extraordinary journey, and I feel really grateful that I had that opportunity. But I will tell you, one of the things I learned on that entrepreneurial path of creating a company was there are a lot of people out there with a lot more information that I do not have, people with more experience than I have. So I started calling these folks and saying, hey, can I come meet with you? And I got some great advice along the way. Over and over again, I got great advice, and people often said yes. I was surprised at how often people were willing to meet with me who didn't know me, other CEOs, other successful business people in the community, venture capitalists, and they often said yes. In fact, most of the time they said yes. And I learned so much from them. And then I wanted to share that with everyone else. So that's why I'm here today, because I do believe that, I wouldn't be where I am today without the advice of others. And I want to make sure that I continue to always give that back to the entrepreneurial community. When we work together and support each other, then we continue to build this entrepreneurial ecosystem, particularly in Maryland and really in this country. So that's how I ended up at the company called Matrix that I'm probably best known for. It was actually also a case study at Princeton on entrepreneurship. And I feel enormously proud. That's probably the company I'm best known for. But that was just, I've now at this point probably advised on hundreds of early stage companies because I love this space and I believe in this opportunity. When I left that company, there's something really important that I wanted to do. It was just a coincidence. And, when I went into the office that day, I knew it was going to be my last day. I was transitioning to the new CEO, but by coincidence, it just happened to be 9/11. We didn't know it was 9/11. I was watching the news in the morning and we saw the first plane hit. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, I didn't think that was possible in this country, that would be a terrorist attack. I thought it was an accident. And as I was driving into the office, the second tower was hit. And I stood and watched the towers come down with my team in this company that I had built. And I made a commitment that day that I would at some point go into public service. I didn't know what public service looked like or what that meant, but I knew I wanted to give back to this community in this country that has given so much to me. So that became a goal of mine on that day. But I had a more pressing personal issue I had to deal with first. When I left Matrix, I decided to go back and have my rape case investigated. Now, the truth is it was never investigated because the police didn't believe me. They closed the case almost immediately. They never did a real investigation. But now I've been successful. I've gotten a master's degree. I've built a company. I've had this great running business. And I was just determined that they were going to investigate my case. So I started calling the Baltimore City Police Department over and over again. And finally, I got someone to take on the case. And after 19 years and my case being investigated 19 years later, it was solved in 3 days. So the guy was arrested. And that really was probably the biggest shift that happened in my life because there was a sense of freedom that came with justice. But I kept saying to the police, look, I know this guy knew what he was doing. I mean, he seemed very, very, like he was too comfortable. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. And I said, I believe he's done this before. And they said, we're going to focus on your case. So he had been arrested several times, but never for anything like that. And a couple of years later, it turned out I got a call from a detective in Baltimore County. They were investigating multiple cases with matching DNA. And I had decided to go public with my case because the night before the guy was arrested, I just made this pact with myself. I said, I will do anything I can for the rest of my life to help other people. Because the truth is that when we get something extraordinary like that, or we've been affected by something in such a deeply personal way, for me, I felt that it was my gift. It was a gift to be able to help other people. I mean, for me, profoundly, it shifted my worldview. And now I've been given this opportunity for freedom and for a sense of justice and peace. And I wanted to be able to give that to others. And so I chose to go public with my case. And my decision to do that ultimately led to something really extraordinary. There are still actually over 2,000 slides of DNA sitting on the shelf in Baltimore County, dating back to 1977. Well, there were another 200 before. There were originally 2,200. Now there are about 2,000. So a couple hundred of those cases had been investigated, and they found matching DNA in multiple cases. In fact, almost 24 of the cases had matching DNA, but they didn't have a suspect. And the detective working on those cases did a composite or a profile of the suspect based on some information from these cases dating back to the late 70s. Well, her husband had watched the 48-hour show about my case because that was part of my advocacy, do anything I can to help others initiative. And the 48-hour show did an in-depth analysis of my case, and it was viewed by the Baltimore City Police. So a detective working in Baltimore City, who's married to the detective in Baltimore County, working on these unsolved cases, had a conversation one night, and he saw the composite drawing and said, "You really should look at this guy." So my decision to go public ultimately was the key to making the connection in these cases in Baltimore County. And in fact, the guy who had attacked me was already in jail and was up for probation when these other cases were solved. And now he will spend the rest of his life in jail because he, in fact, was the worst serial offender in Maryland history. Had I not chosen to put myself out there in a very public way, he would have been released and he would be on the streets today. And so I say to you that while the entrepreneurial journey is so important, giving back to our community and society and showing up where we have something to contribute is equally meaningful and important. So I continue that advocacy work to this day, but I wanted to fulfill my goal of public service. So I ended up running economic development in Howard County in Maryland. And then in Anne Arundel County, where I lived for, pardon me, over 20 years, the county executive went to jail for misdeeds in office and they were going to replace him. And 16 people threw their hat in the ring for that position. A county executive is like the mayor. I didn't actually know that before I was in public office, but you know the mayor of Baltimore City. That's a very prominent position. Well, there are 24 jurisdictions in Maryland, and Anne Arundel is one of the largest. And the county executive, which is like the mayor, runs the county. And I was selected as probably the most unlikely candidate to become the next county executive. And so I fulfilled my, my goal, but also had the tremendous honor of serving my community, running the county that I considered my home. So that was my time in public service, which we could certainly talk about if you have questions on it. But that was kind of like, for me, was the pinnacle of my career. Even though I'm still an entrepreneur and I still work with entrepreneurs, I feel really grateful that I had the chance to do that because serving my community was just an extraordinary experience. And so with that, I feel like I've talked forever and I'm going to stop talking. But the reason that I just want to end with this, why did I become an entrepreneur? I became an entrepreneur because I needed a path to opportunity. I wanted to go the traditional path. I mean, I'll be honest about that because, a lot of people who have gone the traditional path have come to me and said, I want to be an entrepreneur now. I see that you raised money or did this and I want to do it. And I have cautioned them because it's a really tough path to go. But for me, it was always going to be my path. There's no question that I went down that path because I wanted to create opportunity for myself. But the truth is I had a lemonade stand when I was 7. I was always going to put a smile on my face and try. And so I believe in possibility. I believe in the potential in every one of us. And I believe that entrepreneurs are not necessarily born, they are made. But you have to have that fundamental, spark of initiative in order to be successful with it. You have to be resilient. You have to be determined. And if you know anything now from my story, it's that I had to be resilient and determined to live. And so those same skills actually they served me well as an entrepreneur. And I'm really grateful that I had a chance to do the things that I did. But my path was one that was created. It was not one that was made. And ultimately, the way it impacted my life is that quite simply, I mean, I live an extraordinary life. The day that company was sold was a life-altering moment. But it's not just about money. It's about, I love this. I care about it deeply. And I believe in it. And so believing in it is what keeps me going every day. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here with you today. And so I'm happy to answer any questions that might be helpful, maybe more technical than personal, but I'm also happy to answer personal questions too. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. A very fascinating story. Not the first time I am hearing it, but I just still sit here with my jaw dropped and just absolutely fascinated. Thank you. Um, and I have another comment. Very motivating and inspiring story. Thank you a lot for sharing. Well, so anybody has a question, you can either submit them via Q&A or at this point you can also raise your virtual hand. There should be a raise hand button and I can unmute your microphone as well if you would like to do that. But here's my question. Is entrepreneurship the right path for everybody?
That's a great question. I realized that I was just so focused on sharing the story that I forgot about the rest of my slides. This is me graduating from Loyola, which is almost unbelievable. This is the company that I built with the co-founders, Mike Arneson and Bill Bandy, Dr. Bandy. Matrix, this is in the Washington Post. And then very funny, I want to share that Loyola put me in their marketing materials as someone who was a profile of a successful student, which I thought was very funny. I asked them if they were sure they wanted to do that, considering I hadn't finished high school or college. And then this is me working I was on the board of a technology incubator in Anne Arundel County long before I became county executive. And one of the details I wanted to share is that you need these points of credibility. And the reason I put this up there, I've received many awards and accolades, but I do believe it's important that you put yourself out there for this kind of recognition because it continues to build your credibility. And this is me, of course, as county executive, cutting the ribbon, which there's a lot of ribbon cutting as a county executive. But back to your question, Ala, I mean, how can I be specific about it? Like, which direction would you like to go on it? Because there's so much that I could say about the entrepreneurial path.
Well, maybe what kind of qualities do you think that are right for the entrepreneurship? And do you think anybody can be an entrepreneur, or do you think there are certain qualities of certain people who is just not the right path? And I don't know the right answer to that.
Yeah, so, the more general part of that question, and then I'll go down to the specifics on the qualities, because I think that is so essential. I don't think entrepreneurs are born or that you are or are not an entrepreneur. I believe anyone can be an entrepreneur, just like I believe anyone can be a leader. It really comes down to whether that's something you want or not. Like, I was not a person that was seen as a leader when I was a child. I was shy, I was quiet, I was more introverted, and that was expected in my home. So, but you can see in my photos that I'm still smiling. I still believe in possibility. And I think that is absolutely the crux of it. If you are an optimist at your core and you believe in possibility, then you have the mindset for an entrepreneur. But the qualities that make a successful entrepreneur are resilience and determination and preparation. There's a lot of making sure that you've done the work. I mean, you would be shocked at how much time I spent rehearsing presentations or going through business plans over and over and over. That preparation is absolutely essential. The idea that we could now, waltz into a venture meeting and say, hey, I have this great idea, those days are over. They want to see that you're prepared and that you're thoughtful, but they also want to know that you're credible. So the truth is that I never shared my personal story because I was uncomfortable about it. In fact, I never shared it until I was in my 30s. I never spoke about my history because I was embarrassed. And I thought, wow, I didn't finish college, or I've been through this traumatic event in my life. People don't want to hear about that. They want to see me as successful. And so I put on the success suit, right? I wore the suit, I wore the heels, I walked in prepared, my hair was done. I was always very much about being professional. And I wanted to fit in. And so I followed the rules that went with that. And then one day I was in this meeting with a potential investor for our company. And he asked me about myself. Like, he said he wanted to know more about me. Like, it never occurred to me that he wanted to talk about me. I was there to talk about the company. And it was the first time that I realized that people who invest in us with their money or their time, they're investing in us because they believe in us and they want to know us. So he wanted to know if I was a good investment. And the way that I let him know that, other than through my preparation and explaining this idea that we had and that we had to present, was to let him know that I was credible because I was willing to work hard. I don't give up. I'm determined. I will stare at the ceiling every night at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to find a solution. I will never give up. Nothing will make me give up. And that was when I sort of had this moment of, gosh, wow, he wants to really know who I am at my core so that he knows that I'm going to take this personally. Like, this success matters to me. And I think those qualities are so essential, especially if you're raising money, if you're working with any kind of venture capitalist investor. But they're also, even if you don't need outside money, you still have to have that mindset of I'm not going to give up. I'm going to be determined. And most importantly, I'm going to be resilient, because you will get a lot of rejection. It is a guarantee that you will get it. I had a spreadsheet for tracking potential investors, and there were like 60 different firms on that spreadsheet. I treated it like it was, my sales list. Like, how you have a sales lead list and you're constantly calling those leads, trying to close a deal. Well, I treated my interaction with the investment community the same way. It was like my sales pipeline, and I was just going to keep going until I was able to raise the money. And that kind of resilience in the face of constant rejection is absolutely essential to be successful. Now, that doesn't require you to be an extrovert or any sort of personality. It requires that you have that determination, that optimism, and that resilience to keep going, even in the face of challenges. I think that's more important than anything else.
Yep, thank you. Thank you so much. This is so important. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? If it's easier, you can raise your hand or just type it in the Q&A. Or
while you're taking a look at that, Ala, I'm going to add a footnote to what I just shared, which is, and I did not take my own advice, so I'm going to be honest about this. You also should have a stopping point. So let's just say it's 3 years. Set your date, set a limit on how much money you're willing to spend or put at risk. And when you reach that, you've got to reevaluate, because a lot of people feel like they should never give up because they should never give up. Like, we say that all the time. But the truth is that there's a point at which it might not work. And for me, I was putting myself in jeopardy and whether or not I could pay my mortgage. But if you have kids or you have a family, I mean, I didn't have that at the time. So I could take a little more risk, but you need to know where that limit is. And I strongly encourage you, if you are in a relationship, to know where your partner's limit is as well. Sometimes it's not going to happen. So much of it is about timing. There's an element of luck. It could be the best idea in the world, and it just might not happen. Just like you have to recognize that you might not be the person to run the company. You might need to bring that partner on, or you might be the person to run a company and you need to find someone with the right idea. That partnership is essential. And I will tell you, one day I was walking a venture capitalist through our office, and it was completely unplanned. But I walked into the office of the founders and I said, these guys are the reason we're here. Didn't even think about it. Didn't think, it wasn't planned. It did, it wasn't like I was like laying out the tour ahead of time. It just happened instantaneously because that's how I felt. And without even thinking about it as well, they responded, and Laura's the reason we're still here. And so my point there is the team is so important. I mean, your role, your contribution, obviously, either whether you're the business entrepreneur or the technology entrepreneur or both, it takes a team of people to be successful. And when you're building that team, make sure you have a good balance, a healthy balance of different perspectives. Because the best work I've ever done is when I brought people from the industry and other smart people not from the industry and brought them together to challenge each other. And we've always built a better product and a better company that way.
Thank you. So we have a question asking, so that is a good point, referring to you talking about the limits. Is 3 years a decent time to make a limit?
Well, I don't know your personal circumstances. How old are you? Do you have three years of cash flow available in your savings so that you can continue to pay your bills? It depends on what the idea is and what the circumstances are. Are you raising money along the way for 3 years? I would say if you spent 3 years, haven't raised any money, and you're not making progress, then you either need to bring someone else on your team or you maybe need to redirect. Now, the company I shared with you, Matrix, they had been around for 3.5 years when I joined the company. And it was another year after that it took to really get it off the ground. So there's not a perfect timeline, but just know in that case, they had gone out to every investor in the community and had gotten rejections. I mean, they tried to do everything right, but they didn't have the business experience to balance their tremendous technical depth. And had I not signed on, I'm not sure where that would have gone at that point. But the truth is that, that was a 3.5 year timeline. There is no perfect timeline. It might be 6 months and it might be 6 years. It depends on the idea and the circumstances. If you are raising money along the way and you're building a really solid team and you're still getting good feedback, then that timeline can be longer. But I would suggest, and I know it's a little bit controversial because I've heard two different perspectives on it. I think every deal has shelf life, but I also believe if it's a great idea, it's a great idea. If it's a great idea, it's going to have some longevity to it. But once you go from it being an idea and you get down that path to turning it into a product and a company, it has shelf life. So you can't go back to the same investors if they've not invested in your company. You can't go back to them 6 months later and say, hey, we made it better. I want you to take another look. That works once in a while, but you can't really count on that. So just know that once you start that process of productizing and building the company, you're going to have shelf life if you need outside money.
Right, and also just to add to that, depends on what industry you're in too.
Yeah,
If you're trying to launch a therapeutics company, it's going to take much longer than if it's a software as a service, for example.
absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, that those are all really great points. Um, so I don't see any other questions, but I wanted to thank everyone who came in. Actually, there's another question. Great story. The state of Maryland, wonderful as it is, still needs more successful companies to buttress its economy. Would you consider further public service to help bring more successful businesses to the state?
Well, of course, I'm always going to care about giving back where I can. I will always be present and contributing wherever I can be helpful, truthfully. I mean, I will say that as much as I love being an entrepreneur and I will always work with entrepreneurs, I'll never stop being focused on serving in some way because this is our community. This is where we live. This is where I'm raising my kids. I mean, we want to do everything we can to be helpful. And beyond that, I just loved the work. I genuinely enjoyed being in public service, and I hoped to be again. I threw my hat in the ring for governor this past go round, and I had to step out of the race because I had a family emergency. And everything is fine now, but it took a couple of months that really needed my attention. But I'll always be present and happy to contribute wherever I can be helpful. Thank
And
you for
also
that very kind question.
also to add to that, so Laura Neuman is now serving as entrepreneur in residence with the University of Maryland, and she's available for weekly meetings. I posted a link where you can look at her schedule and sign up, or you can just go to go.umd.edu/EIR small caps 2022, and you can see her and also link to our other entrepreneurs in residence where you can sign up to meet with Laura, where you can really get down and ask Laura what she thinks of your business ideas and what do you need to do. And she is a absolutely fantastic startup mentor.
Thank you. You're very kind, Ella. Thank you. I love doing it, and it's just a real joy to be affiliated with University of Maryland. I've met so many amazing people, truly. There's a lot of talent there.
Thank you. It's an honor to work with you. Well, thank you so much. Our hour is up, just right on the dot.
Oh my gosh,
um,
you're right.
yeah. So thank you to everyone who came and asked great questions. And of course, thank you to Laura for sharing your amazing story. I know it's not always easy to share very vulnerable details, but thank you so much for doing it.
Well, thank you, Ella. We're all on a journey. We all deal with challenges, and I bet every single person on this call today has an amazing story. So I look forward to hearing more of them as we meet and follow up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a good day.